Hello, tin whistle friends! You will now learn how to play all notes on your tin whistle with this complete tin whistle fingering chart. And the best part is that this chart works for your standard tin whistle in D, as well as any other key whistle, including low whistles. That's part of the beauty with tin whistles. They share the same pattern of notes, regardless of the key of the whistle. Now, if you want to download this fingering chart as a PDF that you can save on your computer or even print out to use for your learning, your practicing, or simply using as a reference, I will include a link below where you can download this chart. Alright, let's begin and learn all the notes with this fingering chart now. Alright, so I will use a high D standard tin whistle to demonstrate this, so if you have yours available, pick it up and practice along with me now. To the side of me you can see the fingering chart for the first octave, so I will now play all the notes going from the lowest to the D in the second octave, so you can see that you can actually play all 12 notes of music, because all music is made up of the same 12 notes, regardless of key, of scale, or whatever style of music you play. It goes like this. 1. Alright, so the first tip I have for you now, before you start to practice this, is regardless of whistle key, the key of the whistle is the major scale. That is how it is tuned, starting from the low notes. On a high D whistle, that will be D major. So the main notes, without playing any of these half-holding special notes or the cross fingerings, only the main notes on the high D whistle is D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, and D, by simply lifting one finger at a time. So lowest note, D. And then you can see the third note in the chart is lifting the lowest finger. So that's E. Lifting the fifth finger is F sharp. And then lifting, so you have only the left hand, 3 holes covered, is G. Then A, 2 holes closed. Look at the chart beside me. Then B, only the top hole closed. Then when you lift all fingers, so it's all only open holes, that is C sharp. And I recommend that you hold the whistle by having your thumb at the bottom here and your pinky just below the lowest note. You can even hold with your thumb and pointer finger here on the left hand, and then hold it with your mouth, of course. That will stabilize the whistle so you can play the C sharp. And then for the D in the second octave, to really finish the scale, you close all holes, but you open up the top hole, because that way, you don't have to, but that way the second octave D will be much clearer and easily accessible, like this. Okay, so you can actually play all the main notes only if you want to, and stick to the D major scale or the relative minor, which is B minor. Okay, so my second tip here is to access all these in-between notes, you use what's called half-holding. So I will demonstrate this by taking, for example, the, let's do the second, or the 8th note, A here, top 2 holes closed. I recommend this. It's probably the easiest note to half-hold when you start practicing this. Now you can see from the chart that the note 9, I'm actually using a cross fingering to make that easier accessible, but you can always access an in-between note by half-holding, always, on any flute. So what you do is you lift or slightly your lowest finger, the hole you close like this, 1 and 2. The second here, you just angle it slightly outwards. I don't know if you can see it, but if you angle it, and I want to practice, want you to practice this by first playing the A here, slowly angling the second finger outwards, and you will hear the pitch goes up as you release more and more air until it's completely open, which means you are on the note B, which is note 10. You want to access that in between 8 and 10, the 9 by half holdings, like this. Now we are at B, and you can go in the opposite direction, slowly angling it backwards again. Remember to breathe very softly, otherwise we'll get screechy, squeaky note like that. Very softly when you practice this. Then you can check with a tuner to see where exactly that in-between note is. So in this case, A sharp, which is also called B flat. So that's the same notes. Between A and B, you have A sharp, or also called B flat. So from A, then you check on your tuner to see where you find that A sharp, and then release it to get the B. So that you can practice, especially on this note, you should be able to do it even as a beginner with good practice. However, there are some holes that are very hard to half hole. So the lowest hole, in this case D sharp, is ridiculously hard. On some whistles, it will be impossible, because you get this very fragile, weak sound. But if you breathe super softly as you can, and try it. And just slightly angling it up, you may be able to do it. But except for that note, on all whistles I have found, you could half hole every other hole. It might be easier, it might be harder on some holes, but except for the lowest hole, you should be able to do it. Now, as you can see from this chart, sometimes you can use a cross fingering because half holing is tricky, especially in a fast phrase. So on note 9 and 11, so on a D whistle, the A sharp and the C natural, you can use these cross fingerings if you prefer. So A, again, angling outwards from the second hole, you can get to the A sharp. But if you check, you can do this cross fingering. Just close all holes and release hole number 2 from the top. And then release everything except the top hole, and you are at B. So A. Much easier to get to that perfect pitch without any half holding, because that's tricky. That takes time to go with a half holding technique. You can also see on note 11, which is natural C on a D whistle, closing the second, third, and fourth hole. In most cases, in my experience on most whistles, that will be the best pitch for the natural C. So going from B to C and then C sharp. However, it's always dependent on the whistle. So that's the third point here. Tuning is always relative, depending on your actual flute model, brand, and design, how you play, the breathing pressure, air pressure, and so on. So you always need to check with the tuner and make adjustments. I've seen on the internet most charts show the C natural as the second and third hole. Depending on how much you push the air and your brand of whistle, in my experience, in most cases that note will be slightly, a tad sharp. And to my ears, a sharp note in most cases sounds worse than a slightly flat note. So I have made a habit of using this fingering for the cross fingering, second, third, and fourth hole closed. But always check with your tuner and make adjustments if it is better, perfect pitch with only second and third hole. Use that cross fingering instead. Cross fingerings are tricky that way because they are dependent on the whistle design, a particular whistle, and how you play the air pressure and so on. So that's the first octave, the fingering chart for your tin whistle. Now that takes us to the second octave, and you will see a new fingering chart beside me, and it's pretty much the same as the first octave. However, there are a couple of differences, as you can see. So let's go through them all one by one, starting with the second octave D, so the first note in the second octave. You get to that note by closing all the holes like you do on the first octave low note, but releasing the top hole. And you do this because it's easier accessible and it will sound cleaner, easier to get to that note. So if you play the lowest octave D by closing all holes, and then just releasing the top hole and blowing a bit harder. So low, and then high, second octave D. Now, the next note is closing all holes and then just angling outwards the lowest hole just a tad to play the D sharp. And this is actually, in most cases, it's hard, but at least doable, whereas the second note, the D sharp in the low octave, is pretty much a no-go zone in most cases. So high D, then high D sharp, release the lowest hole completely to get to the high D, the third note in the second octave. And I will now go through all up to the third octave D to play the full second octave plus the D in the third octave. So if you play, again, E, third note, only lowest hole open, then continuing. As you can hear, very loud, very piercing, and that takes us to the first point, which is the full range of any tin whistle in any key is actually 2 octaves plus some more notes in the third octave. However, you rarely play higher than the high B, especially on high soprano tin whistles like the standard D, because it's simply too loud, too piercing, and shrill sounding. So the high B is the 10th note here in the second octave, closing the top hole. That is pretty much the highest note I play, and most songs you don't want to go higher than that. That takes us to the second point here, which is transposing songs for your particular tin whistle key. So on a standard high D whistle, you can easily play in D major, again, all the main notes like this. If you start on the closing all holes and then only releasing one finger at a time, you're playing the D major scale, or the B minor relative scale, because you don't need to do any half holing or any cross fingerings. That's just the standard notes. It's basically just simply similar to playing all white keys on a piano keyboard. You can then play in C major or in A minor using only those white keys. In the case of the D whistle, you can also play E minor and G major easily by just using one note as a half hole or cross fingering. So that means that if a song is, let's say, in A major, let's say, and you see here that if you only have a D whistle, it's better to transpose that song and play it in G major instead of A major by bringing it down a full tone. So from A major to G major, because then it's easily playable. You can, of course, play any key song, but you will use a lot of half holing, and that takes us to the third point, which is it's good to have a tin whistle collection. And I'm not saying this to make you spend a lot of money and get addicted like I have been collecting tin whistles. The reason is because the tin whistle is primarily a diatonic instrument, meaning that it is designed to easily play the main notes of the key it is based on. So D major in this case, or B minor, the relative scale. And you want to avoid too much half holing because it's tricky to do in a phrase like. And on the lower holes, the half holing will sound a bit weak and fragile. So that way it's better to actually pick another key whistle. So if a song is in a key like, let's say, A minor, you can pick a G whistle, and you remember, just like the D whistle, if you skip the lowest hole and start from the second bottom hole, that will be A minor on a G major whistle. And I will probably do a chart on this as well later, but you just need to be aware of the fact that it's often better to simply pick another key whistle if you want to play along to a song in a specific key. And that is why I and many tin whistlers have a whole collection. You can see it back here. I have like 12 different whistles in different keys. Okay, so what I want you to do now is practice on your tin whistle, starting on the high D standard whistle, using these charts, playing the first octave and going from the bottom note to the high, to the octave in the first octave, and then do it for the second octave. But start by only playing the main notes, so all the notes that don't use a half holding or cross fingering. You want to become super comfortable playing those all the main notes on your tin whistle. Then you start to add in and practice some of these cross fingerings and half holding to get access to eventually all 12 notes of music. And when you start, I think it's better to start practicing the half holding on the top holes. So with your left hand, if you're right-handed like me, the top 3 holes here, especially the top 2 holes actually. Those are more easily playable with half holding compared to the lower holes. Now remember, you can download this as a PDF, the fingering chart for the first and second octave on your tin whistle, and use for reference, practice, etc. If you check out the link in the description below. Good luck practicing, have fun learning, and I will see you in the next video, my friends.